Hello everybody, you have tuned in to Erekose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I cover virtually any aspect of making a murderer. I go over the evidence, the documents, the photos. So if you like, stay tuned, and in the future I'll have many more videos besides the one you're about to see. Hello everybody, how you doing today? Hey, how you doing? We're here today to talk about the staircase. I want to talk a little bit about the staircase and things. I recently just watched it this week again. Rolled over some things, grabbed a couple clips from the staircase to kind of illustrate something that I want to kind of illustrate here. And it has a lot to do to centering around the fact of when there's a wrongful conviction. I'm sorry to say this and break this to some people, but there are far more victims than just the victim's family. Yeah, wrongful convictions are a son of a bitch that way, right? So, that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. I want to kind of show some of the ways I feel that is illustrated here that the county of Durham really did a lot of damage and really, in my mind, didn't have the proof to back up their theory. That's, honestly, that's just the way I feel about it. They just really didn't seem to have the proof. I don't believe the blowpoke was used to kill Kathleen. I don't believe anything could have been used to hit her that in any way that would have been, hitting her with blunt force, basically, no matter how light or however, whatever instrument you want to try to, goof around and say could cause that. No. If somebody was hitting her like that enough to cause those wounds, they would be causing damage to the brain and to the skull as well. That's my problem here. That's why I can't get on board with the prosecution's theory. Never could, because I could not explain those wounds. Why were they so superficial? I know they look terrible. I get that. They look terrible. But when you think about it, they're literally skin deep. So why is that? How do you explain that? That's what I'm, that's my issue. Now, am I saying the owl theory is the end-all be-all answer? I'm not going to tell you that. But I am going to tell you that there's a lot of reasons why the owl theory actually fits a lot better than the prosecution's theory. Hands down, way better. It has a lot, there's a lot more about it that fits than the supposed prosecution's theory. Now, I'm going to show you some things here today. One of the first things I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you the scene of another staircase fall, or a staircase fall. I don't believe Kathleen Peterson fell on the stairs, but she could have. But I personally think that if she had fallen down the stairs, we would see more of the blunt force trauma. More of the evidence of it, the skull fractures and bruising on the brain, hemorrhaging of the brain and stuff like that. We would see that if she had fallen down the stairs. So that's why I say, when it comes down to it, the owl theory looks like a really good fit to explain the superficial nature of the wounds, but yet they were bad enough that she would bleed out from them. Okay, similar to the way that the elderly woman, Catherine Scullion, who we're going to see the scene of the staircase where she fell, and we're going to see what it looks like, and then I'm going to show you with it side by side with the Peterson staircase, so that you guys can look at it and see it side by side and realize that the one on the left, which is Catherine Scullion, is very similar to the Peterson staircase, and we know there was no homicidal involvement in the Catherine Scullion case. Now, you will hear me say something interesting when I'm talking about the Catherine Scullion scene, and that is that the first responders immediately thought it was a machete attack. They were assigning homicidal intent when they saw it. And I think a very similar thing happened with Durham when they saw the Peterson staircase. And they weren't interested in that point at trying to figure out what happened anymore. They had already decided what happened. And I really think that's what happened here. Don't necessarily think Durham was doing it maliciously, but I think they were being lazy and taking shortcuts and really doing a dishonor to Kathleen and her family by the approach they took, to be perfectly honest. So we're going to go ahead and start off here. So like I said, the first things I'm going to show you is a staircase fall, not related to the Petersons. Then I'm going to show you side by side with the Peterson staircase. Then we're going to get a little bit from Caitlin, okay, Kathleen's daughter. I've pulled 2 clips of her speaking from the documentary, and I intend to kind of go through it and give you some of my thoughts about some of the things that she says and point out some of the things that occur to me as she's speaking. And then at the end of that, I'm going to come back and do one roundup here, talk to you for a bit, and do a big roundup and talk about the owl theory a little bit, and talk about the video that I'm trying to get, here down the road, where I'm going to get the pictures of, the front door, the drops to the front door, pictures of the reindeer maybe that they were putting out that year for Christmas. So hopefully going to get my hands on those pictures to really show people even more why I now have become convinced the owl theory could actually be possible. I had been struggling with it until I heard David Rudolph in Melbourne, Australia. When I was there in Australia, in Melbourne, he was talking about the owl theory, and he finally brought up the thing that helped me to understand why Michael wouldn't have heard her getting attacked by the owl. And that's because it looks like she had gone to put a couple reindeer out on the front porch, which would have been on the opposite side of the house that the pool was on, which is where Michael was, right? So she would have been out on the front stoop, and it's basically believed that while she was putting those little reindeer ornaments out there on the front porch or whatever, that an owl swooped down and attacked her or whatever. Now, these owls are known to go for the head. I'll talk about all this at the end. But like I said, there's just some reasons why the owl theory is clicking, because there's certain things that it explains. And there's certain things, like I said, the blunt force and the hitting of Kathleen and beating her, that doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. Because, like I said, there would be more than just there would be more than just lacerations on her head. There would be skull fractures. There would be brain hemorrhaging or bruising, right? So, anyways, before we get into the owl theory, I just want to show you guys a few other things. So, like I said, we're going to show you another staircase fall here. We're going to see a little bit from Caitlin, and then we'll come on back ultimately for me to wrap up and talk a little bit about the owl theory. So, here we go. Hello, everybody. How you doing? Okay, so this is a photo I've shown before in another video where I did a video regarding this, but I'm showing it again today to because I'm trying to draw, kind of several threads together in this video, and so this is one of the threads. This is the scene of an accident, a staircase fall over in Scotland. A very elderly woman named Catherine Scullion basically was getting up in the middle of the night to get some tea. She had woken up and then she wanted some tea to, I guess, go back to bed or something, right? So she wanted to go downstairs to get some tea. And as she was about halfway down the stairway in the lift, because she's elderly and she really couldn't negotiate the stairs herself, really, it stopped halfway. And she sat there for a while, trying to wait maybe until morning or whatever, but eventually it got so cold, she began to get fearful that she was going to, get very cold. And so she attempted to get out of the chair and attempted to get out of the chair, part of the staircase lift. And upon doing so, she fell, and what happened is she was found here where you're seeing in this picture by her granddaughter in the morning, and it, very sad. But there's something I want to point out here. First responders on the scene said immediately that they thought it was a machete attack. Now, I just want to point out how easy or how quickly people see a scene like this and they immediately want to start assigning murderous intent. Even though this one is clearly it was just a staircase fall, there was no homicidal intent involved or anything like that. But upon walking in, people were already thinking about what weapon caused it. So I just want to point that out about. So when you think about the next part, when I'm talking about Durham, just remember that how over here in Scotland, first responders came in and immediately thought machete attack, right? So just wanted to point this out. Also, while we're here, I mean, just look at all this blood up on the walls, going up on the walls. It's, you know, it's quite, you know, I mean, that's a lot of blood, you know, and nobody was here. Nobody was sitting here beating on Catherine Scullion. There was no homicidal, you know, anything involved here. And that blood still looks very similar to the way it looks in the Peterson staircase. Just something interesting I thought I would point out. Anyway, so this is the scene of a staircase fall for everybody to look at and take that into account. Okay, so that you can see side by side, to really see this next to each other. On the left is Catherine Scullion in Scotland. That's the scene where she had fallen from her chairlift. And on the right, that's the Peterson staircase there. To me, remarkably similar. Remarkably similar looking. Very similar. To me, there's virtually no difference. People tell me that it looks like wiping. It looks the same on both. So maybe if there was any wiping, it was maybe the person who was bleeding out in their own pool of their own blood that was wiping the walls with their hands, reaching with their hands, trying to maybe get a handhold on something, trying to help themselves up, or I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, these two scenes look awfully, awfully identical to me. So that is why I have some difficulty saying that the reasonable doubt was removed in terms of Michael Peterson. I don't think that it was. Especially when you look at Devers and his junk science, and you know, and you see a lot of the games, and I'm going to talk about it here today, a lot of the games that Durham was playing, you know, it turns out that the medical examiner who testified it was blunt force trauma, basically when Michael was going through his appeals process and he had won a new trial and stuff, she eventually came out saying that she didn't think it was blunt force trauma, that she felt pressured to say so by a superior. I mean, and then you look at what they did with you know, the death in Germany, and the way they exhumed the body and drove it thousands of miles to Durham instead of letting a medical examiner, an impartial medical examiner in the state where, you know, where this person was at rest, essentially. Why wouldn't you just do that? No, they had to drive the body thousands of miles so that the same medical examiner, who has now recanted that it was blunt force trauma, basically, could examine her too. I mean, it just shows just for me that the prosecution, the Durham County prosecution, the DA's office and the police department were playing games. They didn't care. They came in, and I think just like those people in Scotland, they came in and saw it and just automatically assumed it could only be homicidal attack. That was the only thing it could be. That's what I think happened. That's honestly, and they let their own imaginations run away with them. Because I think Kathleen, I truly am starting to believe that Kathleen really did get attacked by an owl. It fits better than anything else. It fits way better than the prosecution's theory fits. I'll tell you that. The prosecution's theory is a real joke. But we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so some other things I want to bring up, especially before we go into this bit with Caitlin. Those of you who watch The Staircase, you know. Number one, Radish, the medical examiner, right? She ended up sending a note to David Rudolph during the post-conviction process after, you know, Michael had been issued a new trial, right? He got a note from her saying that she didn't think it was blunt force trauma, right? And something to the effect of she felt pressured by her superiors to say that, right? Then, like I was talking about just now, is there's the whole thing with Miss Ratcliffe and him bringing her all the way from Texas to Durham instead of just having somebody in Texas do the examination, an impartial person, right? Which only would have helped their case, honestly. But they wanted to control everything. Look at the way Deaver did his experiments. They wanted to control everything. This does not look good. This doesn't make Durham look good. Okay? So you take these things into account. Then there is the blowpoke. Okay? This is the biggest, biggest thing in my mind, really, that's doing the prosecution in here. Because they claimed that this blowpoke was mysteriously missing, right? Okay, that's what they claimed, right? Then it gets found. They find it, okay? This is just so bizarre when you find out. So they bring it in and they say, look, here's the blowpoke. It's not mysteriously missing or whatever to shoot that hole in the prosecution's case. But the prosecution comes back saying, oh, well, we just said it was something like the blowpoke. No. And David Rudolph pointed out, no, in your opening arguments, you said that it was the mysteriously missing blowpoke, right? So it turns up. Well, so Michael gets convicted, right? Even though that blowpoke is covered with bugs and cobwebs and clearly wasn't used in a murder, there was still a conviction. I don't know how. I don't know how the jury explained to themselves that this happened, that somebody killed Kathleen based on what the prosecution had said. Really, how did it happen? I personally did not see that from the prosecution how it happened. I saw them make a wild stab and it was horribly wrong. That's what I saw. So for me, my reasonable doubt was never removed. Now, am I saying Michael is 100% innocent? No, I'm not. I'm not saying that. But I am saying there's a fair amount of reasonable doubt here. More than just a little, in my opinion. Right? So we're going to move on a little bit more here to where I see the agents of Durham and the harm that they did here, chasing after a conviction and like I said, being lazy. They walked onto that scene, just like the first responders with Miss Scullion, right? The first responders there immediately thought machete attack. Immediately thought that, okay? So, I believe the Durham, officials here saw that staircase and immediately thought homicide. Immediately thought homicidal attack. And that was the only thing they were going to accept. Never mind that they couldn't explain it. Never mind that they couldn't give you a plausible theory of how she was beaten and all these sort of things and how and how it could explain the wounds that she had on her head and stuff, right? So you look at all these things, and through their own laziness and their jumping to conclusions, they destroyed a family. I mean, they destroyed the Peterson family in a lot of ways. And like I say, it's mainly because they were just lazy and taking shortcuts to what they felt was the truth. Right? I mean, that's just the way I feel. So we're going to move in now to a little bit about Caitlin here. Now, keep in mind, the blowpoke, before this part starts, right? The blowpoke, okay? It's so, everything around the blowpoke is just so immensely bizarre, right? So we have the prosecution says it was mysteriously missing. Then, before the defense rested, they found the blowpoke. They brought it in as evidence and all that, right? Okay, we're going to see a clip here of Caitlin talking and saying that blowpoke isn't the blowpoke that her mom had or whatever, that she doesn't recognize it, that it's not the blowpoke that she remembers there. Okay, I just want you guys to remember that, because as she says it, as she's saying it, folks, keep this in mind. The Durham police found that blowpoke in the original days of the investigation. Yeah, they found it. Two crime scene techs took it out on the front lawn and photographed it. Those photographs never got turned over to the defense. Yeah, at least not at trial. David had seen them during post-conviction, but they were never handed over during trial. So we have 2 Durham crime scene techs or officers that picked up the blowpoke, took pictures of it, and then put it back in a place where they didn't find it. They put it back in the garage, Kathleen's garage, essentially. The garage where Kathleen's car was parked, essentially, right? So that's where they put it back, not where they found it. Okay, that's to me highly interesting. Why would they do that? And then not only did they put it back somewhere where they hadn't found it, but then they acted like it didn't exist and tried to assert this claim that it was mysteriously missing. I mean, how disingenuous is that? So this is why I say, when we're going through these clips of Caitlin right now, think about my words about how Durham, in their jumping to conclusions and basically laziness and taking shortcuts, you know, because they didn't want to actually try to figure out what really happened and what they did to a family. And that means Candace too, Kathleen's sister. I mean, look at the hate that they instilled in her. I mean, the level of hate. And I understand it. I understand her. And I am not knocking Candace one bit. I'm not knocking Caitlin one bit. You'll never hear me ever speak ill about a victim's family here on my channel. But look at what they did to her. Look at when you see Candace speak and the just the hatred underlying in her that lives in her, you know, that really is a product of jumping to conclusions and taking shortcuts like Durham did with this investigation. And I say that because, folks, just remember Catherine Scullion. The first responders came in and immediately thought machete attack. We were immediately thinking murderous intent. Okay? So that's how I can easily see the Durham police officers and stuff immediately thinking the same way. But maybe that wasn't the case. Maybe it wasn't homicidal. So, here we go. We're going to go into the clips of Caitlin here. And so I can hopefully illustrate a couple things of the damage done by lazy law enforcement and lazy district attorneys.
In general, I got a chance to look at the blowpoke during lunch, and it's definitely not the same as the one that my Aunt Candace has brought in to court. So, you know, there leads a lot of speculation there as far as things go. It has very distinct differences between the two. But I mean, more importantly, the thing is that regardless of, you know, you produce a blowpoke the day that you arrest your case, and you know, I feel like it's just to really create kind of a commotion and things. And the fact is, you know, you can show that, you can claim whatever you want about it. It's not going to change the autopsy report, so it really doesn't put a hole in the prosecution's case the way that I think that David Rudolph's attitude thought that it would today. It doesn't change the fact that my mother's autopsy report says that she was beaten to death, and if it was with the blowpoke, if this was the blowpoke, I don't know, but it was with something, and that's how she ended up at the bottom of the stairs, and nothing's going to change that, and you know, that's finalized.
That was easy, wasn't it?
Okay, sure. Done and done. Can I go home now?
Okay, so that's the first clip of Caitlin. That's her, basically right at trial, right before the verdict comes in and stuff. The blowpoke has just been brought in. And you notice how she talks about, oh, it's not exactly like the ones my Aunt Candace brought in. Kind of tells you that Caitlin now looks to Aunt Candace for direction. Like, maybe Caitlin's not really trying to think about these things for herself. And, you know, another thing I'll point out is Caitlin feels that she's been properly informed here. Once again, I'm not knocking Caitlin or Candace or any victim's family, but listening to her talk, she sounds unsure of herself and the things that she's saying. It sounds like she's just regurgitating things I think that Candace says, and I think all that stuff is all coming from what Candace has been fed by Durham. The DA's office and the police department, whatever, all those, you know, all those agencies. I believe that is what is, you know, causing, you know, Candace to be so severe and so angry. because she has been pumped full of lies by Durham. Now, I know some people out there still think Michael's guilty, and I don't have any problem with you for thinking that. But the fact of the matter is when it comes to reasonable doubt, it wasn't removed here. How did this murder happen? Not like the way that Caitlin was just saying. At the time of trial, what she's saying was believed because that was the testimony. But we now know that Radish has recanted that. She told you hear it in the documentary where she tells David Rudolph, she sent him he talks about he got a note from her where she says that she doesn't think it was blunt force trauma, and it wasn't, because on further examination it has been pointed out there are no skull fractures and there is no brain hemorrhaging or bruising. So blunt force trauma is kind of ruled out. Remember what I said about Catherine Scullion? First responders immediately thought it was a machete attack. They immediately went to murderous intent. So just remember, this is what I think happened. Because remember, folks, what you have to remember here. Remember Caitlin in the beginning, in the first few episodes, where she was talking about what a loving relationship Michael and Kathleen had, and how Michael had come along and her mom had been so sad and was crying every night and stuff, but she met Michael and she was happy again and all those things, and she was just glowing praise for Michael. Then all of a sudden Durham starts finding every dirty thing they can about Michael, and then they just start feeding that to Candace, and then therefore to Caitlin and all that, and then they turn Caitlin away from saying those things that were going to hurt their case. So it was like strategic for them to want to feed all of this misinformation. And like I said, getting Radish to say it was blunt force trauma when she clearly recants it later, saying that she didn't believe it was. These are problems. These are all things that misled the family and caused rifts in the family. Okay? Like I said, I'm not saying that Durham went and did this, with specific intent, but I believe they were lazy and jumped to conclusions and just didn't want to bother to question whether or not they had made a mistake. They just weren't interested in doing any of that. They were just fine with destroying this family, just so that they could put Mike Peterson away in prison. And like I say, the proof is weak. It is. It's honestly very weak, in my opinion. There's a lot of circumstantial stuff, and then the fact that the blowpoke falls apart is a huge problem. I honestly do not think that reasonable doubt was removed, and honestly don't think Michael should have ever been convicted of this. Doesn't mean I think he's fully innocent, but I don't think he should have been convicted, because that's the way our system works. Guilty or not guilty. If you're found not guilty, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not guilty. It just means that there wasn't enough evidence for a jury to convict you. That's what not guilty essentially means. So that's why David Rudolph points out that over in Scotland they have something called not proven instead of not guilty. It's called not proven. And it is actually possible to be brought back on court, to be brought back to court in a case where it's not proven, when they find more evidence and possibly have to face a trial at that point. So it's that's what Scotland has. We don't have that here, but like I said, not guilty doesn't necessarily mean 100% innocent. It just means that the reasonable doubt wasn't removed. And I think that's what happens here, honestly. So now we're going to go into the next clip of Caitlin, and we're just going to hear some more of the things that she says. And I just want you to think as you're listening to her, knowing some of the things that I've been telling you during this video, and knowing about some of the things that come out, like Radish, changing her opinion about blunt force trauma, the fact that blowpoke was photographed in the first days of the investigation and then put back in a place where it wasn't found, right? And all these things, just consider that while you're listening to Caitlin talk.
I started to have doubts, of course. I mean, how can you not when you're hearing all these rumors going around and things like that? But it was the physical evidence that allowed me to actually go back and look at the situation as a whole. Because, reading the autopsy report, I think, was the point at which I was convinced that my mother had been murdered. Obviously, the horrific intensity of the wounds and the fact that I just, to me, could not physically come up with a way that you could get 7 deep lacerations on the back of your head
by falling down the stairs. I think that there's so many elements to Michael Peterson that I can't possibly understand. I think that from what I've learned in the last couple years, he clearly did not hold himself out to myself and my family as the same person that I had grown up thinking that he was. I think that there's a very deep level of misunderstanding on my part of his character, or possibly an element of multiple characters, multiple personalities, to the extent that I can't necessarily say that I will ever know what exactly happened. You know, weeks later we find out that he's bisexual. That to me is something that he did not hold himself out to be unfaithful on any level to my mother, and to think that he had this secret life going on is just, it's baffling, and it makes me think that there are so many things that I didn't know about him, and it cancels out all trust I have in him. And that's very scary. I did consider Martha and Margaret my sisters, and, you know, my mother considered them her daughters, but my goal, my strength in life is completely opposite. It's in seeking justice for my mother. That's what I'm here for.
All right. So what's your takeaway there? What is it that the two things that Caitlin seems to be relying on to her prove Michael Peterson's guilt? The medical examiner's report, the coroner's report, basically, right? She keeps hanging her hat on that. Well, we already know, that has been, that Radish has changed her opinion on that. That she doesn't believe it's blunt force trauma anymore. Like we heard in the staircase. So that's one thing. That's one leg knocked out. What was the second thing Caitlin was relying on? The fact that Michael had little bisexual affairs going on. Granted, it's dishonest that Michael would have been doing that. I'll grant that. It's dishonest and everything, but does it mean he's a killer? I don't know. I don't. I'll acknowledge this though, and I will give this all day long. If Kathleen didn't know about his extramarital stuff and found out about it that night, then yeah, I could imagine that might have sent him into a murderous rage, but I still have to explain how he did it. Because if I felt it, in my opinion, if he went into a murderous rage, he would have killed her with blunt force trauma, but we don't see that. Yeah, they tried to say that that's what it was at trial, but that's not what it was, and the medical examiner has now said that that's not what she believes it is. Right? And that makes sense because there are no skull fractures. There is no brain hemorrhaging. Okay? So yeah. But I get what she's saying. If in fact Kathleen didn't know, and if she found out that night, then maybe. But there's a lot of ifs and maybes here. Right? And then we still are left to explain, wait, but even if that all happened, how do we explain the superficial nature of the injuries? I'm not saying that I'm not saying that the injuries aren't horrific. They obviously were bleeding very badly, and they caused Kathleen to lose blood and die from basically lack of blood, essentially. But what I'm saying is that they're not blunt force wounds. They're cuts. That's what they are. They're cuts. That's the odd thing about it, and you have to take that into account because, yeah, I believe he could have gone into a rage and killed her over, like I said, if she found out about the, extramarital stuff and confronted him and he went into a rage, I could see that, but the wounds aren't telling me that. So once again, I run into that roadblock of, wait, but how? How did he do it? I keep running into that roadblock. So those are the roadblocks I run into, but as you can see, Caitlin, I think, is just overwhelmed by all this, in pain. She lost her mother. My heart goes out to her. I know she loved her mom. It's terrible that Kathleen was taken from Caitlin and from Candace and from the other sister whose name is escaping me. I'm sorry. But the fact that Kathleen was taken from her loved ones is absolutely tragic and horrible. 100%. Did Durham make the situation worse by jumping to conclusions and then just being lazy in their job. I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate. It really truly is unfortunate. And you know, but I don't think that I think that Durham potentially did a great deal of harm to this family. And like I say, if it's all because they were jumping to conclusions, just like those first responders in Scotland to Miss Scullion's house, and if they were jumping to conclusions the same way those guys were, I could see very easily how this happened. It suddenly becomes easy to explain how and why Durham did what they did, and it's not difficult to explain at all. It really isn't. So I'm now going to show you guys a few things to illustrate what I'm talking about with the wounds on Kathleen's head. I'm going to show you owl talons. I'm going to show you some examples of barred owl attacks so that you can see what kind of damage they do in attacks. And I'm going to show you a few things here. So and show you just a little bit more of why I see that why I kind of envision the owl theory is really starting to click in a lot of ways. Not saying everybody should go ahead and be on board with it, but I'm just going to give you the reasons why it's clicking. I'll give you many of the reasons why it's clicking. I like I said before, I had issues with the owl theory until I was in Melbourne and heard David Rudolph talk about Kathleen going and putting the reindeer out on the front porch and the smear of blood in the front doorway, like in the door jamb, and then blood drops leading from the front door to the staircase. When he told me about that, I went, oh, that was my biggest problem with this case, is how could she have been attacked and Michael wouldn't have hurt her? Oh, well, if she was putting ornaments out on the front porch, that would be a way that Michael wouldn't have hurt her. I mean, he wouldn't have heard her scream when the owl attacked her and stuff. And suddenly it's possible for this theory to work in my mind, but I may run into another hurdle at some point. But for right now, to explain the superficial nature of the wounds, how they are just extremely bad lacerations and not actually any damage to the bone or brain tissue underneath those lacerations, just a few things that make the owl theory kind of work at the moment. Better than the prosecution's theory at trial works. I'll tell you that. So I'll get into a few of those things now. We'll come on back. Okay, to start off, we're showing you this cute little guy. Well, except for those talons. Those talons don't look so cute. Anyways, this would be a barred owl. These guys are known to be aggressive, particularly when they have young nearby. They are particularly protective and that sort of thing. And they will go after humans and animals. It's not unheard of. They have a reputation for being protective, and barred owls do live in the neighborhood where Kathleen and Michael lived. So that much all lines up. It's they are known to be aggressive when they have young nearby and stuff, and I'm going to show you some pictures of these owls on attack and that sort of thing, and show you some of the injuries that were received from these owls and everything. And so but this is the guy. And then one thing I want to point out just before we go on to the next section here, you see that here where the feathers are here around the talons. Okay, notice how they're not as bushy and long, and they don't look like most of the other feathers on the owl. That's because these down here on the legs and talons are what's called a micro feather. It's literally so small you need a microscope to be able to see that it's actually a feather. So that's just something I want to point out, and how close those feathers would be to the talons, right, folks? Okay, so just wanted to point that out real quick. Now we'll move on to the next thing. Okay, and this is just an image caught from a game camera in the wild, basically showing one of these barred owls going after a deer, and just look at where they're going for, folks. Look at what the owl's going for. I'm just pointing out some of the obvious things, obviously, here. But what is that owl going for? It's going for the back of the head. Like these owls, when they attack, go for the back of the head. And possibly while they're... And it's... I think it's also possible that they go for the eyes. As they maybe rotate around the head or whatever, they will go for the eyes. And I'm going to show you some evidence of that as well. That they tend to like poke in around the eyes, and sometimes I think they even are able to like really, you know, do some damage. You know, I don't want to show anything too gory here, but basically I'm going to show you some images where we can see that the talons poked around people's eyes. They poked in, but maybe didn't get a good grip and pull on the eye or anything. But like you can see marks where they've poked in around the eyebrows and on the cheek below the eye and stuff. So, but anyways, this illustrates these guys are pretty aggressive when they feel threatened, or when they maybe feel their young are threatened. That they are highly capable, and like I said, look at right where it's going for. I just think that's telling. Anyway, moving on to the next thing. Okay, so this is a gentleman who was attacked by an owl. And you can see these marks here around the eyes. Here you can see he's got a little something going on in there, right? And there's another picture of this guy which I didn't grab, but he's got cuts on the top of his head too, because there's a picture where the blood is running down from his hair and running down his face, like all the way down to his chin, like it was bleeding pretty badly. So it's like I said, these owls do seem to go for the head on humans when they do attack. So this is just to show you guys what I was talking about with around the eyes, you know, and the way that you know, seems to be a common thing that these owls will do as they're attacking the head. So I just wanted to illustrate that one. I got one more. Okay, so this is just another one where it illustrates. You can see this guy, he was attacked by a barred owl, and you can see these marks around the eye. This might be a freckle, but I'm pretty sure these other ones here definitely are from the owl that attacked him. And so like I said, there is evidence of them kind of going after the eyes and that sort of thing. You know, so just pointing that out, because like I said, it's relevant to me. At least to me it is, because, and also right here looks like something right here. So, you know, like I said, when we see, you know, instances where these owls seem to go around the eyes, I think that suggests that may be a common practice for them. So just wanted to point that out. Okay, so now I'm showing you this, which is essentially representations of the wounds of Kathleen Peterson here. So as we look at the face here, you can see where there's 3 little pokes close together, kind of like the talons. Another 3 little pokes close together. A bit of what looks like might have been a talon drag, kind of like what we were seeing on the faces of the 2 other guys I just showed, right? Another one down low, below, right here down on the cheek, right? Across the nose there, looks like. So that's why I say this gives me even more reason to think maybe she did get attacked by an owl when she was putting out the Christmas ornament reindeer thing, you know, out on the front porch. I mean, because the representations here of these you know, abrasions around her eyes just remind me of those 2 other pictures I just showed you of people who were attacked by barred owl, you know, and they had the same similar kind of thing. Like these owls basically go for the eyes and head. It seems like something they would do. Okay, so there's that. That's why, and one reason why I think the owl theory is still something to be considered. But then we look over here at these guys, right? I mean, what would make all this curly Q kind of, you know, everything that's going on here? What would explain that? Maybe something that was flying and trying to grip and trying to whatever was making weird loop-de-loops here and that sort of thing, right? I mean, that to me would explain why all these things look so crooked and jagged and strange. Like if it was a owl flying and couldn't stay stable enough, so it wasn't making, like, you know, straight cuts or anything like that. That's why it kind of seems to me. And then, like I said, I'm going to show you right now. Look at this guy right here. And this one kind of says it, you know, pretty well. Look at that shape on that. And now I'm going to show you something else. Okay, so this is a representation of a barred owl talon, right? And being compared to that tri-forked, you know, wound on the top of Kathleen's head. I mean, pretty remarkable how well spaced, how much it just fits right into place there. And even if we look at this one over here, maybe this was the left talon here, came down and hit her, and maybe this over here where we have kind of three things, you know, where it's kind of loop-de-loop right here, right? But maybe it was one talon, and maybe the talons came together at the top, and as, you know, as it was pulling downward, one went this way or whatever, but it's kind of forked too, so maybe that's where the right talon landed, and it drug down, and maybe that's how those two were made, and then it came back down and maybe drug down with its talons again here or something. It's, to me, makes more sense than than she was being beaten with anything, personally, because it's just, I mean, the way that the talon matches up is just remarkable to me, to be perfectly honest. So, you know, this is one of the things that I think causes me to continue to consider the owl theory. It just has a lot of things that fall into place in a way that it doesn't do for the prosecution. It really doesn't. The other thing you have here, folks, is upon microscopic examination of some hairs of Kathleen's they found microscopic feathers of the barred owl mixed with blood tangled into Kathleen's hair, some of the hair they found. So, you know, once again, this all makes an owl attack highly plausible. You know, it or at least makes it plausible at the very least. Maybe not highly, but plausible, because where are these owl feathers coming from? And even with blood on them, even, you know what I mean? It's just, it's, to me, there's more than just a couple of you know, spurious reasons to consider the owl theory. I think there's several actually really good reasons to really continue to keep looking at the owl theory, because I really am finding more things with the owl theory clicking than I see anything the state ever came out with. So I hope I've illustrated to you guys today why some of the real reasons why I think the owl theory may actually be something we should all begin to take a little more seriously. But I'll go ahead and talk about that as I wrap up. Okay, so to wrap this whole thing up, really, I want to, you know, obviously I started out with the scene where Miss Scullion had fallen on her stairs, and what that scene looked like. I've let you know about the fact that the first responders on that scene immediately thought machete attack. Immediately. That's where their minds immediately went. Homicidal intent. Immediately. Okay? They eventually realized it was just a fall, but that was their first thought. Okay? So that's how Durham, upon seeing the Peterson staircase, could have went the same way. Only they didn't, they weren't able to tell as easily as they were in Scotland with Miss Scullion that it was a fall. Whatever it is, they were either unopened to the idea, whatever it was. They immediately went with homicidal intent and stuck with that. And even though the facts weren't coming in really to support it. I mean, Radish, the medical examiner, clearly told David Rudolph during post-conviction that she did not feel that it was blunt force trauma. You know, I mean, and it isn't, because there are no skull fractures and there is no brain hemorrhaging or any bruising on the brain or anything. So that's why I can't see it being blunt force. I guess I can see, let me just be very clear. Yes, I could see the possibility if Kathleen found out and didn't know about, Scott's extramarital stuff with guys, right? If she didn't know about that, and she suddenly found out about it and confronted him, I could see him possibly, he could have freaked out. Okay? I could see that. But I still run into the problem, is that I'm not seeing blunt force trauma. So I run into that roadblock. Every time I try to think how Michael could have done this, I run into the roadblock. Okay, but how did Michael make these injuries? Why would he make such really strange, unique kind of cuts on her? That's what I'm left thinking. Why? How? What would? What? How did he do this? What? It just doesn't really fit, right? So, those are the problems I run into. So yes, I acknowledge that would have been a motive, but I still run into the problem of it doesn't fit with the injuries. So I'm still left wondering on that, right? Okay. So that explains how Durham could have walked in, immediately thought homicidal intent, because we already know in a similar case, a similar thing happened. At first, they thought machete attack, right? So obviously they come in, boom, they decided it's homicidal attack. It's okay. Even though, like I said, the wounds are superficial in a lot of ways. They are not. There's no skull fractures, no brain hemorrhaging, and they still don't let up. They find the blowpoke. They take pictures of the blowpoke. Then they put the blowpoke back in a spot where they didn't find it. And then go on, and the prosecution then goes on to not turn those photos over to the defense at trial, and then to claim that the blowpoke was mysteriously missing. They're the ones that put it back in a place where they didn't find it. I mean, just think about the disingenuousness of that alone. Right? This is what Durham County was doing to split a family, create massive amounts of pain and anguish because they thought they were right and they didn't want to. And even though the evidence wasn't really supporting them, especially when the blowpoke gets found, even when the evidence wasn't really supporting them, they didn't back off. They backed this ridiculous case all the way to the hilt, and they got their conviction because that's all they cared about. Justice was not a consideration here. It wasn't. Because Kathleen certainly didn't get justice. Do you think Kathleen, let me ask you this. Do you think Kathleen, if I'm right, and blunt force trauma, and it wasn't a crime of passion, as I kind of think it wasn't, because the wounds don't suggest a crime of passion. They suggest something nasty, but not a crime of passion, not blunt force trauma. And do you think Kathleen would have wanted her entire family destroyed if, in fact, Michael didn't do this? Do you think that's what Kathleen would have wanted? And I'm saying there's a fair amount of reasonable doubt here. Do you think... Did they do Kathleen justice by being lazy and not coming up with a actual plausible theory of how Michael did this? Have they harmed Kathleen? I think they have. And not only Kathleen, but they've harmed her family, Candace, her sisters, Caitlin, her daughter. They've harmed, and even the two girls that were being taken care of by Mike and his two sons. They all lived together. They were happy. If you guys remember, at first Caitlin was saying how loving and everything that Michael was, and she didn't believe that he could have done this and blah, 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 blah. But Durham kept working on Candace, and Candace kept working on Caitlin, feeding that misinformation. There was one piece that wasn't misinformation, but it was highly prejudicial, and that's about the extramarital gay affairs or whatever that Michael was having. So that they're digging up every skeleton, they're feeding every negative thing they can to Candace and Caitlin, and creating this rift because they're going after their conviction. And like I said, folks, at the Scullion residence, they immediately thought machete attack. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that's what happened with Durham. They immediately thought homicidal intent and just went with it and never questioned. And what harm, I mean, look at the potential harm they did because they were unwilling to question it. When they couldn't really make the facts meet their theory, they tried to adjust the facts. They get Radish to say it was blunt force trauma when it wasn't. They get her to tell the jury that when it wasn't. Right? So they're effectively changing the facts to fit their theory. Right in court, and nobody gives a damn. Right? So, how much of an injustice did Durham do? Not only to Michael Peterson, not only to his family, but to Kathleen Peterson, her sisters, her daughter. All the way around. Who got justice here? Well, I guess Jim Harden moved on to a Superior Court judge position, so I guess he got what he wanted, right? Eventually moved on to a Superior Judge position. So, and these are the kind of people we put in judgeships that pull this kind of crap. And remember, folks, thanks to AEDPA, we no longer have the hope that the federal government can step in and keep our state courts honest, right? AEDPA has pretty much removed that. So it's up to us, folks, to be vigilant, keep paying attention, keep talking about it, keep talking about all this stuff, talking about Peterson, the staircase, MAM, Avery, Dassey, for me, Scott Davis in Georgia, folks. You know, a lot of the cases I follow, a lot of the wrongful convictions of youth that I follow and talk about. So these are all issues we need to keep talking about. I just wanted to put together this comprehensive reason of why I feel Durham was very disingenuous and really, really did a lot of harm to a family that was really close-knit and literally drove a wedge so that they could get their win. And I think it's despicable. So that's all I have to say about the staircase for today. You may see me live tomorrow to follow this up. But for now, that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.